Hey, so Skype interview, David Ernst, Liquid Democracy. I'm not going to say much more about those things. You're going to find out throughout the actual conversation. But what made us reach out to him is because this is not just about the vision, and he's actually taking the right steps to implement it. And that is what I'm trying to understand more about the space. It's not just about ideas, but it's more about the strategy or the tactic you use to get to that idea or that vision that you want to achieve. And that's what makes it really interesting to talk to this guy. So enjoy. I am super excited to be talking to you about basically what you're trying to do. And I think I really like the way you termed it, Democracy 3.0. And I think that's a really nice way of looking at it, especially for me as a philosophy student. When I looked at a couple of the talks before, it was things about Hegel and dialectics and where it's coming from. It got me really excited about this whole conversation. But before we dive into any of that, I want to kind of see what background you're coming from. I'm expecting from the smile on your face that you have a philosophy background as well.
That's right.
So tell me, what's your story?
Yeah, so I'll go in reverse. So most immediately, I've been working in the tech industry in Silicon Valley, in various startups that I joined that were already a little further along, and a few that I started myself, and in all different industries and all different applications. In general, I'm really into this idea of creating ways for many more people to participate and allowing many more people to access an activity that was previously harder for, more siloed. Before that, I was in college studying philosophy and math. I did a math and philosophy double concentration.
Those almost always seem to go hand in hand with each other, philosophy and mathematical thinking, I would say.
Well, it comes from a line in Plato's Republic, actually. He says, it's not good to teach philosophy to younger people before they're 25 or so, because when you're younger, you're kind of not as ethical. And so you'll use the rhetorical devices that you learn to trick people, and you'll be able to convince anyone of anything. Yeah. And so you should spend your first 25 years studying geometry, which is what he meant by math. Mm-hmm. And it will help you develop the abstract thinking skills and then study philosophy after that.
Yeah, because I think Plato almost bet on the fact that if you get the logical thinking, then you'll all end up with the same answer. So you don't have to worry about anything, right? And there's no trickery happening there. So you were a philosophy student, and then you went into tech. How did that happen? Like, that was just...
Well, again, stepping backwards more. So before college, I've always been really interested in tech. I first probably wrote a program when I was probably 9 or 10 years old. Okay. My main entry path was, again, combining the math and everything, was a TI-83 calculator, the programmable TI calculators. We had a fantastic math teacher when I was in middle school, and he had this rule that we could use programs on any of our quizzes and tests as long as we wrote it ourselves.
Oh, that is cool.
Yeah. Well, so it made for this great incentive. We were in a pretty nerdy class at the time. And so me and some of my friends would always try to race to see who could finish. It was supposed to be an hour-long test, and we'd see if we could finish it in 10 minutes or as quickly as we could. And so we had to pre-write all the formulas. How do you make the volume of the sphere? Or how do you find the other side of the triangle, or whatever it is? And so our teacher, intentionally or not, gave us a really strong incentive to learn how to program these things.
Yeah, I mean, that's cool, right? Because that's almost baked into the learning process that you're going to learn anyways, right? And the incentives almost line up, and it's not just cheating, right? Because even if you get the code, you learned, because it's only by learning that you can get that perfect code and finish the exam. Yeah, unfortunately, because we had the same calculators, but in all the exams I sat, there would be a round of teachers coming in and checking we didn't have anything on it and deleting anything we had. But I remember playing some like basic Mario games or Snake games on it. I was amazed with what could be done on these.
Completely. Yeah, those were the days.
All right. So that's so you always played around with tech. Tech was always part of your...
Yeah, when I was 11 or 12, I tried to invent emojis. Okay. Back way before emojis invented. This was back in the AIM instant messenger days. if you remember this, and there was a very limited set of smileys that you could use. And so as a over-eager 11-year-old or whatever it is, I tried to start this thing called P-smileys, personalized smileys, where you could design, upload, and download other people's packs and reuse everything that was available, and other fun, silly ideas. The internet was a great tool at a young age.
Yeah. It seems like there's the perfect narrative here. You were in the math class and you were already playing around with tech, and then you get into philosophy. And yeah.
And it's funny, actually, that same math teacher, we never thought about this at the time, but he was a PhD. He was teaching middle school math classes, but his PhD was actually in political science.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
Who would have guessed? You go from that to teaching math. Yeah.
I mean, that's the thing, right? Because if you try hard enough to connect the lines, the game theory in math and political philosophy and all of that kind of line up appropriately, and you can see the connections between the different things, right?
That's true.
So, and then now we come to your latest venture, right?
That's right.
And it's not called, it's Liquid Democracy, which I right?
Yeah, so this is a tiny bit of a confusing point. So Liquid Democracy is a name that was around before I ever came along. Liquid Democracy is the most commonly used name for this concept of peer-to-peer political representation.
Okay.
And so people have been talking about this in various forms. The big innovation in its current form was around 2002, I want to say, or 2003. This guy named Brian Ford wrote this paper called Delegative Democracy. That's another variation, another name for this model. But there are similar ideas going back hundreds of years. There's old Lewis Carroll books where he talks about these ideas, and there's this line from the Rights of Citizens and Man from the French Revolution where they says every citizen has a right to participate in creating the laws, either themselves or through a representative, which really plugs into these ideas nicely, going back 240 years.
Yeah.
But so the liquid democracy is sort of the abstract name for the concept, in the same way that social networking or social media is the abstract name for the concept, whereas Facebook or Twitter are particular platforms that allow people to do that. Okay. And so the platform that we've created is called United.vote.
Okay, all right. So if you could take it back, because so liquid democracy is the concept that you guys are applying through your platform. So if you could take it back, because I always like to think about social innovation projects based on problems and what problems they're solving. So if you could walk me through where democracy is right now, like how they got through it, because I've seen bits of this in your presentations where you talk about direct democracy and then representative democracy, and now this new form of democracy that you want to kind of try to implement. And if you could kind of hit the points where you think what's wrong with them, because I have some questions there which I think need clarification. I think going to the source is the best way of learning more about that.
Totally. Yeah. So the first point I want to make is that democracy is an ideal, and it's sort of more of an abstract concept, and it's continuing to evolve. And it's the goal of a democracy is how do we deal with problems collectively in a fair, collective way, or in a fair way that allows people to participate. And there are many issues that we want to deal with in our private lives, personally, one-off. But there are certain issues that we also want to deal with as a community. And when we need agreed upon collective action, that's what our democracies help us to achieve. And so there have been a number of different models throughout history for how to get this done. The simple story that I like to frame this in is, in the 4th century BC or the 3rd century BC in ancient Athens, we talk about this invention of democracy. And that was this model where everyone would come to the forum, to the agora, and could be side by side and talk about the issues, if they were allowed to participate. And there's a whole question of who's allowed, who's legally recognized or not. But everyone was in the same space together. And It is celebrated as a huge achievement in so many ways. It also has some downsides, like every model does, but it's got 2,000 years of history behind it.
Okay.
So I like to frame this as democracy 1.0.
Yeah.
Then we move to what we see today, the most common model around the world, what we typically call representative democracy. I like to reframe that not as representative democracy, but as electoral democracy.
Okay.
Simply because there are other ways to pick representatives, and that's what we'll get to. But the key is that we hold elections once every 2 years or 4 years or 6 years to pick a single authority to go to the legislature, far off, to travel from California to Washington, D.C., to represent the million people in our legislative district. Mm-hmm. And this model, there are some precursors of it back in ancient Rome and everything, but it really took its stride. We think of it in this, new constitutional republics, like 1776, 18th century model. And this was a time when there was no electricity, when you didn't have a telephone, you didn't have a telegraph. If you wanted to get a message from New York City to the capital in Philadelphia at the time, and then Washington, D.C., you have to write a note out by hand, give it to a guy on a horse. He rides for 4 days. Hopefully he makes it. Someone gets your message, writes a reply, takes another 4 days to get back. And that's, It's been over a week just to know if your message has even arrived yet. And so in this model, it's really important, and it's a big innovation at the time over the old direct democracy system where everyone could be in the same space together. We say, okay, we're all busy. We need to be tending to our own farms and all of that. And so we're going to have these representatives to speak on behalf of the people. This was a really important part of the founding of America. Remember, the rallying cry for America was no taxation without representation.
Yeah. So democracy 2.0 in this narrative was almost a reaction that direct democracy was great, but soon people were kind of like, I have my own things to do, right?
Well, so if we were going to get into the nuance of the historical story, there was the House of Lords and the House of Commons in the British Parliament before the American system. But you can sort of think of the electoral model as like a more agrarian or like almost industrial age model of democracy. It's really come alive in this industrial age. It's really taken over the world in this industrial age, where you have a few representatives go off to the legislature. But there's a number of things to notice about this model, in particular when it was being designed. In America, for example, the country only had 4 million people. It was growing quickly, but it was actually 2.5 million at the beginning, 4 million, 5 million or so. And so each representative was only speaking on behalf of 30,000 people. There was a big debate actually about this. Should it be 40,000 or 30,000? And George Washington himself said, no, 40,000 would be too much.
Okay.
People wouldn't feel like they actually know their representative and they can really trust them. It would get too, people would lose faith in their government. It's really important that we keep it down at 30,000.
So 30,000 was like that magic number.
That's what they thought. They actually wanted to write it into the Constitution. The very first American Congress passed a law to write this into the Constitution. And there's this crazy story about why it didn't take effect that we could get into. But suffice to say, it did not take effect. And today, 240 years later, we have on average 750,000 constituents per representative. So from 30,000 to 750,000.
Okay.
So that's I don't know, like 25 times or almost 30 times dilution.
Yeah.
And the lesson to be drawn from this, the lesson that I like to draw from this, is that this model was a big innovation in 1776, but it hasn't necessarily kept up with the scale of our modern world. And as our world has changed so much, the population keeps doubling and doubling and doubling throughout the 20th century. And now we all have instant communication. Here we are talking across the ocean, and we're all plugged into 24-hour news when we can. And so the question to be asked is, if the goal is to create a process for everyone to feel like they can participate fairly And to be able to deal with our collective problems and issues and the things that we do want to deal with collectively as a whole, is there a more appropriate model for this modern information age that we're in with a much larger number of people? And I think the answer is obviously yes. There must be a better model, of course. And we see so many industries and so many activities and institutions have kept up with the times in so many ways. You know, here we are communicating over this video chat. And yet our governments and our democratic systems, which are incredibly important, which manage trillions of dollars every year in their budget, which makes decisions over who goes to jail and who doesn't, and who walks free and who receives vital health care and who doesn't, and all these important things are still stuck in this really 200-year-old model. And there's a whole slew of reasons why that is. You know, people are really protective of these institutions and are weary of wanting to make too rapid changes. But we believe, and a growing number of people in America and really around the world believe, that this new model that is referred to often as liquid democracy, where you have peer-to-peer representation, personal representation, ought to create a democratic process that people can identify with much stronger, can feel a lot more trust in, can be much more inclusive, can represent many more minority constituencies that are currently left out of the process, can be much more resistant to corruption. You know, we can get into the whole thing about money in politics. And one of the issues that's really plaguing America right now, I would say almost fatally so, is this extreme polarization we find ourselves in.
Yeah.
It's like, it's really, really bad. This, you know, we're the good guys, they're all evil, red team versus blue team, Republican, Democrat piece that's going on. And that is, we could expect that to happen. And if you look at the historical record, there's always these two counterbalancing forces in an electoral system. And there's, because of the nature of the election, of the selection process of who gets political power, it's winner take all in America. If you get 51% of the vote, you take the entire seat. And even if you got 49% of the vote, you go home with nothing. And so that creates these really strong incentives for all the various factions to conglomerate into just two groups together. We talk about, like, in America, there's this saying that voting third party is wasting your vote.
Yeah.
And there is a sense to that.
So then you just choose the lesser evil, kind of.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so a lot of people, there's a huge amount of dissatisfaction with the status quo. You know, they take polling numbers on Congress all the time, and it hovers anywhere between 10 and 15 or 20% for the last 20 years. And they've done these polls recently about what are the most corrupt institutions in America, and the number one result has been political parties. And there's just a lot of disillusionment and a lot of dissatisfaction with the options that are being presented to people right now. Yeah. And so we believe that we can create much better, healthier, more trustworthy options so that we can live in a much healthier world.
Yeah, I just to track back there, because my mind immediately when you said about this two-party system where it's red versus blue, I feel like this also translates to the individual level, because where people start seeing things as black and white, right? And where when people see one person on the red team and it's kind of like there's no different nuances there anymore. You're on the red team, so you believe this, right? You're almost piled into one group.
Exactly.
Whereas it might be that on some things you are more left, whatever that means. On some other things you could be more right? But right now, because of the system, it's more, you just bracketed, right? Like on the highest level possible. Okay.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And there are a number of rule changes we can make, system level changes to improve this. Yeah. And liquid democracy is not the only one by any means. There's a whole research, really fascinating research around voting reform and election reform about other voting methods. You know, right now we use something called plurality voting, or also called first past the post, where it's just whoever, you get one vote and whoever gets the most votes gets into office. There are other methods. The most popular one is called instant runoff voting, And there are what I would consider even better methods like approval voting, where you can pick as many options as you want, and score voting, and this really cool system called star voting. And all of these you can model in simulations, and we've seen in other experiments that these don't lead to as polarized outcomes. These don't lead to extreme two-party outcomes.
Oh, okay.
And there are other things you can do. Like in Australia, you're required to vote. You get fined if you don't vote.
Yeah.
And so there's been some really interesting commentary on that it causes the candidates to be much more collaborative, or much more, there's less like mudslinging, because right now, one of the ideas in American politics is that it's almost more effective to keep the other side's base from turning out than it is to actually garner votes for yourself. So that's really unfortunate. And so
it's more about focusing about making the other guy look really bad than saying, why choose me, right? Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And there are all these other models would really weaken that strategy.
Yeah. So there are these multiple number of models, but you guys are kind of honing in on liquid democracy, right?
Well, I support all these models wholeheartedly.
Yeah.
And I have a number of friends working towards them, and I think they're fascinating and great stuff, and I love geeking out on them. The one piece that gives me pause, and why I personally find it most valuable to do the work that we're doing with liquid democracy, is that making any of these changes requires convincing the existing powers that be to pass a new law to change the structure, or to try to pass some sort of constitutional amendment or something to that effect. And it's really unlikely for people that got into power in the current system to voluntarily change the system that put them in place, and that they're currently benefiting from. And so there's just a conflict of interest in the strategy that is not all that promising. Whereas, and this is kind of a nice segue, we have this pretty unique strategy to make liquid democracy a reality in America, which allows us to approach it in a grassroots way that puts the decision directly in the hands of voters rather than in the hands of congressional leaders or legislative leaders.
Yeah, that's actually interesting, because that's one of the things that stood out about you guys when I did some research, is that because what now I know as liquid democracy and what you guys are doing, me and Matt and a couple of my other friends, we always talked about this, right? In your regular Tuesday philosophical talks, but it's always been, okay, how do you implement this, right? Like, how do you get this utopian idea and break it down to step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, and get there, right? And I think that's where you guys are doing something really interesting. But before we go into that, I just want you to kind of lay out what liquid democracy is, because I think that's something like I would really like to just make sure I understand every nook and cranny of it before we go into the strategy.
Totally. Yeah. So again, just looking at our previous options, a lot of people right now think of democracy as these two extremes, either this direct democracy system where everyone's voting on a ballot measure or referendum or initiative, everyone's one person, one vote, or the other extreme of this representative model, what I call electoral democracy model, where we pick a tiny, tiny, tiny percentage of people to go represent everybody. So for the US, we have 535 people out of 300 million, which is 0.00001%. And people see this as two extremes. And sometimes the debate comes along the lines of like, is it better to have rule by the people or rule by the elites? Which is, I would describe as a false dichotomy. But liquid democracy is trying to be this hybrid model where we take the best of both options. And so first and foremost, in a liquid democracy model, every last person can vote directly on policy if they want. Any bill that is currently being debated in your Congress or on your city legislature and your state legislature, you as an individual could cast a vote for or against on it, because you're one person, one person, one vote. With that said, it would be a huge loss to lose out on the representation, and it would be moving back to this model that made sense when 2,000 years ago when everyone could be in the same room. But we still want to keep the representation, and so we can do something even better than what we have right now for representation. Rather than saying only one person gets elected and speaks on behalf of all million people in the district or whatever it is, we say you as an individual can pick who you want your representative to be. Just like how on Instagram you subscribe to or you follow people that you want to fill your feed, or on Twitter you follow people that you want to fill your feed. In a liquid democracy, you delegate to people who you want to represent you.
Okay.
And what that means is if you don't vote directly, your vote will automatically be the same as their vote. It's as if they get an extra vote.
Yeah.
They can cast an extra vote on your behalf.
Yeah. Two questions there. One, and this is, I just want to quickly sense where you stand on this. So ideally for you, you would say everyone should have a equal say in what's happening in the in society, right? Like they should be able to name what society is moving towards.
Yeah, I believe in the fundamental principle, in the American Declaration of Independence, we say all men are created equal. We all start out as one. But with the caveat that there are leaders in our community that we trust much more than others. And so we absolutely do want to have certain people be able to lead us.
Yeah.
And that's where our representative model, the liquid democracy representative model, is really nice, because it says that this is who I trust to lead us, but I can always speak for myself when I want.
No.
To the extent that we want to have every single last person weigh in on an issue, it becomes your individual choice to say either I want to weigh on this, or I want my Uncle Jim to be able to weigh on it, or I want Barack Obama to be able to represent my views, or whoever, Neil deGrasse Tyson or Bill Gates, whoever you want it to be.
Yeah. So, then are you a general advocate for referendums then?
Not exactly. I mean, again, I think of it as these are two extremes. The referendum it has advantages and it has times when it is great, but it also has major disadvantages. The most significant of is that it takes time to really understand all these issues. We're all very busy people, and these are complicated issues and policies and implications and all this. And so there's this idea that's worth noting. It's referred to as the rule, or the low information voter, the phenomenon of the low information voter. And it's not just a slur. It's not just saying stupid people or something like that, but it's actually looking at the behavioral economics of, is it in your interest to take the time to be informed on the issues? There's a cost, there's a benefit to voting correctly, and there's a cost to investigating what the correct vote would be. And the cost stays the exact same no matter how many people are voting, but your benefit is 1 over the number of people voting. You're one of 50 people, or you're one of 1 million people, or you're one of 300 million people. And so your individual vote being cast the correct way, whatever that means, is getting weaker and weaker and weaker. And so the effect of this is that the cost is staying constant, whereas the benefit is getting smaller. And so we would expect naturally the decisions that a direct democracy is making as it gets larger and larger to be less and less informed.
Yeah, because on an individual level, I almost recognize the futility or the insignificance of my contribution. So I'm kind of like, why even bother, right? Like just
exactly.
But
exactly.
So I completely see that. But then what I have, because what you're talking about now is almost like the ideal citizen who recognizes that they're less informed, and then they're like they seek out people who are like, hey, my body, like let's say, Joe Rogan. Joe Rogan knows more about MMA than me, so I'm gonna say, Joe Rogan, you vote for whatever MMA policies there are out there, right? But in order for me to do that, I need to realize that I suck at MMA, right? And I need to be like, Joe Rogan is good, but Do you, is that a fundamental belief that you have, that everyone's that honest when it comes to their shortcomings of?
No, of course not. Of course not. Of course not. I think a different way to frame it is that right now, whether we're talking, I mean, just keep in mind that when we pick the representative, when we pick who the representative is, we're taking a direct vote.
Yeah. Okay.
Right? So we already have to have a direct vote of, do we want candidate A or candidate B to be the representative? Yeah. So we're not getting away from direct democracy with our current model necessarily. But the choice that you're presented as an individual voter is, do I want to cast a vote? I've done X amount of research, whether it's a ton of research on the candidates and the policies and the issues, or zero amount of research, whatever it is. I could cast a vote and I'll count as one person towards that decision, or I could stay home and not cast a vote. And so your only options are this 1 or 0. And what we're saying instead in this liquid democracy is, you can cast a vote directly if you want, or you could say, I really trust my coworker, Alex. I really trust my classmate, Katie. And I know that even if I don't cast a vote, my values will still be represented. Mm-hmm. This is the person who I think is honest, takes the time to look into these issues. And here's a significant thing that kind of trips people up. That person can also pass along both of your votes to somebody else. So like you were talking about with MMA, with Joe Rogan, let's say the issue, let's say we're voting on healthcare, because I doubt we're going to be voting on MMA, just to keep it.
Yeah.
Let's say the issue is health. It's a big, big debate in America.
And he gave it to Dr. House.
Exactly. And Donald Trump, the president, had this great quote. He said, "Who could have guessed that healthcare was so complicated?" And that sort of speaks to what you're saying, is that when he was campaigning for president, he said over and over and over again, I'm going to give us a fantastic healthcare system that everyone's going to love, and it's going to be cheaper, and everyone's going to be fantastic about it. And he was doing what was the most effective thing to do on the campaign trail, conveying this confidence and that he knew what the right answer was. Then when it came time to actually legislate and craft policy, he had he admitted that, actually it turns out it is more complicated than I realized. This is a harder issue. Like you were asking, do people admit whether they know or not? And so the model that we're working towards is that, exactly like you said, you could say, I don't know necessarily that much about healthcare, but I have this, there's this person, Dr. House, let's say, TV character. I mean, it would have to be a real life person.
Of course.
But let's say, Dr. Oz.
Yeah.
I really,
because that's a real life.
Yeah. Let's say it's your actual doctor.
Phil. He's a doctor.
Yeah, he's a childhood friend of mine, actually.
Oh, really? Your friend's a doctor?
Yeah, I've been in his house. Yeah.
Wow, okay.
And my brother and him and his son were on a baseball team together when I was a kid.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, he's a doctor, right?
He's a psychologist. Okay. But that's a good point. No, so let's say he's the person that you trust most when it comes to healthcare. So then he would say, okay, on this, he knows lots and lots of doctors, and he's going to say, actually, this is the most trustworthy person on healthcare. And then that person's going to say, okay, sure, I might be trustworthy on generalized healthcare, but for this particular issue that we're debating, this narrow question of this one procedure or whatever it is, here's the real expert. Mm-hmm. And so in effect, we create this, sometimes we call it like a delegative chain, a chain of delegation, or a trust network sometimes, where each step along the way, ideally, it's getting smarter and smarter. This person knows a little bit more, and this person is even more knowledgeable about it, and this person. And so we end up, in effect, empowering people for different issues who are who we've organically determined to be the most trustworthy on that decision.
Okay.
That's sort of part of the idea.
Okay. Yeah, I'm sorry because I buy I'm really in with the idea, and it's just that the cynic in me always comes out when I hear ideas like this. Is so you're passing it on, right? What you say is when people get smarter and smarter, the cynic in me is right. I see more points of failure,
Yep.
Because I'm like, let's say Dr. Phil, through his TV shows and everything, I get convinced he's an expert. I give him a vote, right? There's a layer of information that's being created that I perceive as the truth, and that's why I give the vote to Dr. Phil. Now, Dr. Phil has 2 votes to cast, and then he has to perceive who's the expert in his circles. Again, facing layers of truth, right? And then my question to you is this a problem that you actually think can be solved in a system design, or do you think this is just something that should be, it's a different problem that we're talking about here?
Well, I think what you're saying is that people can make the wrong decisions of who they trust. They can make mistakes. And that's, without a doubt, that's true. We're not changing human nature or anything like that.
Yeah.
I guess the foundation that we always try to come back to is look at the current system as it exists right now and look at what we're proposing. And we're just trying to make it strictly better than what we have right now.
Okay.
Right now, we can pick representatives who know absolutely nothing about the things that we elect them to. Yeah. And the incentives are really screwed up right now. People get into office because they're really good campaigners and they're really good at fundraising. And those are basically the 2 main requirements. And there's such a limited option. If wherever I live, I can pick among, 2 or maybe 3 or 4 people on a ballot who, truthfully, I don't really know all that well. And they're supposed to represent me on every single last issue. And once they are in office and once they've been picked, well, now, if it turns out we realize we made a mistake, we're kind of stuck with them for many, many years. And so this new model that we're saying, of course, without a doubt, we're going to make mistakes. We're all going to make mistakes. But at least we have the tools to do something about it. We have the option to replace our representatives in real time as we realize, oh, wait, that person actually isn't trustworthy. And we can also, the issue by issue delegation, we haven't actually launched that yet. There's a lot of hard, intricate problems with that we're still working out. But in the future, that will be a much more specialized and expert-driven representative model than what we have right now. This one-size-fits-all.
Okay. Oh, so that's another thing I don't think we spend that much time on. The fact that right now, when you cast a vote, then you have no say for the next 2 years or 4 years.
Exactly.
So from what I understand from the research I've done is that there's a much tighter feedback loop, right? So like if the guy you give the vote to is like, yo, Dr. Phil, you messed up. I thought you'd be doing something else. I can immediately revoke it, right? So that's kind of how it works.
Yeah, I could actually give you a little demo if you want.
Okay.
So this was our prototype that we made for the first version over a year ago. This was for the city of San Francisco.
Okay.
This is a native app, so this isn't actually publicly available. What we have right now is a web app, but this kind of does a really good job of explaining the ideas that we're working with. But yeah, exactly like you're saying, we have this delegates page here in the menu.
Wait, can you hold that up to the camera so everyone? Yeah, okay.
Yeah, can you see that now?
Yeah, perfect. Yeah.
And so the idea is you have multiple people here that you can choose to represent you.
Yeah.
And you can add someone new, right from your phone book. Anyone in your contacts.
Okay.
And if you no longer trust them, so you have multiple choices. So if your first choice doesn't cast a vote, then check your second. If your second doesn't, then check your third. So you're not stuck with only a single person either.
Okay.
And if you no longer trust them, there's an edit button here. I'm not quite sure if I can do this in reverse. So you press the edit button. Now this is in edit mode.
Yeah.
And so you could immediately, reorder them, or you could immediately replace them just like that.
So when you talk about the reorder, it's more like, let's say Samantha gets first pick if it's to cast my vote, and if she doesn't do it, then Alex can get the vote, etc.
Exactly.
Okay. And
so that way you can have, personal friends or your father or someone who you're really close with, who you trust really strongly, but they might not always be active.
Okay.
They might not cast a vote. And so you still, I like to think of each of these representatives as another backup. They're backups for your views and your positions. And so you still might have a national figure after that who, you've never met them. You've never shook their hand or anything like that. So you can't trust them quite as much. but you know that they're probably going to have a vote on this issue.
Okay. And this is a demo that you just showed, and is it beta testing or is it just okay?
Exactly. That was a prototype that we built for the city level.
Okay.
This was 18 months ago when we first started working on this. We were working for the city level. We've now shifted our focus to the national level, and also everything now is on the web, so you can access from any phone, from any computer.
Okay.
Whereas this was a native app that we built that we'd like to add native apps again, but just because of our limited resources right now, everything is web and mobile web so that we can reach more people.
Yeah. And these delegates, I don't know, so this is where we have the kind of separate vision from what you have right now. Can you already assign delegates based on different topics, or is that further down the pipeline?
Yeah, down the pipeline, it's so many people want it and so many people get really excited about it, and it really reframes this from, oh, I don't trust the mob, I don't trust direct democracy, which a lot of people have very well-intentioned reservations about, to this, oh, it's a much more expert-driven representation. This is the expert on foreign policy, and this is the expert on healthcare, and this is the expert on technology. Yeah. And so it will be a fantastic addition. There's some really tricky questions to be answered there about how do you decide for any given issue which category it falls into.
Yeah.
And who makes that decision, and what do you do if if an item falls into multiple categories? And it's not that there isn't a right answer. There are many possible solutions to this problem, but it's not immediately obvious exactly how to go about it. And so we're still experimenting with a few different approaches.
Because I imagine that has to be an elaborate framework which kind of ticks every kind of category in every kind of box. And I would imagine even that framework, I'm sure some guy somewhere is going to be like, this is not really meant to go into this framework, and it's meant to go into this framework,
Which could have a massive impact and really make people upset.
Yeah, exactly. So I see. So right now, what do you have? Like, what are you testing right now, this demo?
So it's not demo anymore. We're publicly launched. We're live. Yeah. Yeah. So what we have right now is we have every item in Congress. So every bill that the U.S. Congress is voting on in the House or in the Senate, anyone can vote yay or nay, and they can add in their explanation for why they're casting that vote. And we automatically send your comments to your existing representative. So it's meant to be an easier tool and a better tool for right now. They say, call your representative and, leave them a voicemail. But that's a really frustrating process for a myriad of reasons. One of which is it's not really clear what happens after you call in, or if anyone's really listening, or if they have any reason to listen. We could do a thought experiment where, your representative, let's say they represent 750,000 people, and all 750,000 people call in and say, I don't want you to support this item, this bill. 100% of people are against it. Well, aside from the fact that it would totally destroy their phone lines, nobody would know that every single last person is against it. It's not clear, except for the representative themselves.
Yeah, I think that's really important, right? Because otherwise you could just be like, I guess I'm the only one who said no.
Exactly.
But this way you can really see that there's a misalignment there. So I think there's a lot of value in the transparency there. Yeah.
Exactly. So we're framing it in this initial stage as an easier and more powerful and more accountable way to contact your representatives with this clear path to where we want to go in the future towards liquid democracy. And the other beautiful thing about this is, so we send your messages automatically to your representatives, and it's easier. It's just a few taps instead of waiting on hold or leaving a voicemail. And we create these scorecards for every single item of how many people. We show you what the representative ended up voting, if they were for it or if they're against it, and then we show you how many of their constituents were also with them in that same position, and how many were against them.
Okay.
And so we add these all up to create these scorecards, and I'm not quite sure how it is in Amsterdam. I'd imagine it's similar. But in American politics, there's these ideas of legislative scorecards. And so there's groups like the NRA or Planned Parenthood or the American Enterprise Institute who say, we give this politician an A rating or we give this politician an F rating. That means their voting record aligns with what we say are the most important things, our group's mission. And the power of these scorecards comes from how many people trust this organization to really know what's in their interest and things like that. And so we're creating scorecards as well with United.vote. We call them liquid scorecards. And they're much more interesting, in my opinion, because they're not based on how much a politician is voting with this private group's board, what their interests are. It's how much are they voting with their actual constituents, with their actual voters' decisions, the people who actually put them into office.
Okay, so just to clear that up, so previously with the scorecards, it was not about the citizens in that region. It was more about the private board of that specific group.
A lot of different groups have scorecards and will continue to have scorecards. But exactly, the grades and the way that they're expecting you is like, the board of directors at the NRA says, these are the 7 items that we want you to vote yay or nay on.
Yeah.
And if you follow what we say, we're going to give you an A.
Yeah.
And based on if you don't, we're going to give you an A.
Okay, so it's not really truly from the people in a way, right?
Not at all.
Okay.
Yeah, not at all. It's how much you follow the NRA.
Okay.
Whereas our scorecards are how much are you following your own constituents' liquid votes.
Okay. Yeah.
And this is really great because it gives everyone all across the country a reason to start using this immediately. Before we get into phase 2, which I hope we can talk about soon, right now we can already start doing this, and it gives people a chance to familiarize themselves with the process and with the outcomes of a liquid democratic system.
Okay.
And so it's there's no consequences of it. It's strictly just descriptivist. It's just these accountability records, but it makes it really clear when our elected representatives are following or not following their own voters.
Okay. So, and you're currently still in phase 1, right?
Yes and no, we're transitioning. So
okay. So before we go into that, I just want to talk numbers quickly for a second. So phase 1, how many users are we talking here, and how many representatives?
So we only just launched like 2 months ago, and we haven't focused on growth numbers at all. We really want this to be a strong product. So we've been really trying to speak with people and understand what's working and what's not working right now.
Crafting that thing as much as possible.
Exactly. We're really trying to polish and get things right. But with that said, I think we're up to about 1,300 people right now.
Okay.
Yeah. And we're growing at a pretty healthy, consistent rate. Something, I think it's around like 35% growth per month or something like that, which is pretty nice.
And how many people do you have on the side of representatives? Is it just one person that these people are voting? How do you say they're paired with?
I'm not sure if I understand exactly. You can pick anyone to represent you as a delegate.
Of course, but then on the state level, because you said
you're saying candidates. So phase 2 now, let's talk about. So phase 1 are these liquid scorecards, these transparent accountability scores that anyone can use.
Sorry, I misunderstood you. So phase 1's just liquid scorecards.
Yeah. Phase 2, this is the plan to actually make liquid democracy a reality. The hard way to do it would be to try to get a constitutional amendment passed, to try to change the law top down, pass this new law. That's not going to happen anytime soon, of course, for a million reasons. Instead, we're starting immediately with these scorecards. And then phase 2, to really put this into action, is what we call liquid candidates, or liquid democracy candidates. And these are people who say, this system is really promising. And, thinking about it from a theoretical level, it has all these great potential advantages and money and inclusion and the polarization and all these other things. And I want to help champion it. And so I will run for office as a candidate in the existing electoral system with a special pledge. I pledge that my one and only policy is, if elected, I will cast every single last vote in the legislature according to my local liquid democracy.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Anyone in my district, any one of my neighbors can start using this, and whatever the liquid democracy's majority outcome comes out to, I will cast my vote along with that. I as a Liquid candidate, I'm one of these candidates in San Francisco, and I'm still going to be voting on policy in the Liquid platform as well, according to my own opinions. But even if something goes against my opinion, I'll go with what my neighbors want.
Okay.
And so it means that we can kind of graft this new Liquid democracy model onto our old electoral model, one seat at a time.
Okay.
Without needing to change any laws at all.
Okay.
Putting the decision directly in the hands of voters rather than waiting on the existing powers that be to make this change. And it's the point is that this is something that will continue to happen over time. If we win any seats this time around, it will be absolutely fantastic and we'll be ahead of schedule. But even if we don't, we're introducing many more people to these ideas and giving people, they're learning about these ideas, like here we are on this call, and people can start using this immediately through the scorecards. And they go hand in hand because the scorecards give people, even where there isn't a candidate elected, a way to familiarize themselves with this and start to adopt this, and also encourage more candidates to run. As those numbers get higher and higher, and we see, this politician is great 90% of the time, but here are the issues where they're actually going completely against the will of their voters, for whatever reason, because maybe they have this donor, they have this personal interest, or whatever it is. They're really not following on this issue, that issue, and the other issue. Well, now we have, not only do we all see it now through the scorecards, but we also have this alternative to kind of, instead of candidate A or candidate B, now we have candidate Z, this totally new option to make it a reality. And so we're moving in this direction towards liquid democracy. And both of these ideas support each other to get us there.
That's awesome. I just want to backtrack for one thing. So you're running as a candidate yourself. You kind of just dropped that in there during the whole explanation. So can we just go into that a bit more?
Of course.
So what was the thinking there?
Yeah. I really didn't want to. I'll be honest with you. It wasn't my first choice. There's a lot of unnecessary intention, let's call it that. It invites a lot of personal attacks and things like that. And on top of that, my skill set is especially attuned towards the technology side and towards the product side. I really did want to be able to focus on that. And we have been talking, there's many of us working on this, dozens and dozens of us working on this all over the country. And so we've been talking to many potential candidates, and there was someone who ran already last fall in Colorado, who's, one of the biggest leaders on this, amazing guy. And my collaborator said to me, we have this whole qualification metric of what makes a good candidate. And it's, are they a good speaker? This, that, and the other thing. And the most important things were that they really understood and believed in the potential of this new system, and then they could communicate about it well. And so my collaborators said, David, why aren't you running? You are more familiar with this than almost anybody, and you've been talking about it already for a year or two. Why, wouldn't it be great? And so it came together rather quickly, but yes, I am now on the ballot. I have all my signatures to qualify. I paid all my filing fees, and I'm running for the California state legislature on these ideas. Yeah.
And I mean, for me, it's almost, it's a beautiful strategy. I think it's, you're just a figurehead, right? Like you are just there to collect the will of the people, in essence. Right?
Exactly.
And so you almost remain, I think that will become the tricky bit, that you have to remain almost agnostic in a way for it to really work out, to show the true utility of it. You have to remain completely agnostic to what the outcome is from the people you're representing, right? Yeah.
Well, there is still absolutely a role for the Liquid candidate to play, if nothing else, than to communicate what's happening in the legislature to the general public at large. Yeah. They're in the room, and so they have so much more access to all this.
Okay.
And our current formulation is that the Liquid candidate absolutely should be voting on the Liquid platform. And they actually, we haven't quite finalized this yet, but we think they'll be like your first recommended delegate when you first sign up.
Yeah.
And so they will probably have some outsized influence on a lot of issues.
Okay.
And, but yeah, the idea is that if you take this pledge, then on every single issue, even if it goes against what you personally would have gone, you represent the will of the people.
Okay. So you talked phase 1, phase 2. Is phase 3 already set in stone, or is that still something that's...
No, I can talk about that. So the downside to the Liquid candidates, like with the fatal flaw of any electoral model, is that sometimes politicians or candidates promise one thing and don't necessarily keep it.
Yeah.
And so as over time, as people familiarize themselves with this, and in general, we've found that people really like this model, except it takes a long time to explain and understand. That's by far the biggest weakness. But given people with an open mind and a curious mind and interested mind and willing to take the time to learn about it, the vast majority of people are really excited about the possibility. And so all signs seem to point that we'll continue to grow and grow and grow. And over time, as we, we'll get one Liquid candidate into office, and then we'll get 2 Liquid candidates into office, and then we'll get 10 Liquid candidates into office. And pretty soon we'll have 50% of the legislature could be Liquid candidates. And then after that, we'll have 50% plus 1. And at that point, the question becomes, is it really helpful to have these figureheads, these Liquid candidates as vessels? If we already have a majority of the legislature anyway, and now we can actually change the laws much more easily, maybe it makes sense to actually make the Liquid democracy legally binding and not need the single point of failure in the candidates.
Yeah.
And so that's a ways away.
Because right now, almost phase 2 is still like based on social pressure and the fact that it's really transparent. So if you don't go according to what your people vote for, it's kind of public shaming in a sense, and then everyone sees that you have kind of erred in your ways. So
yeah.
But then now you're talking about making it even legally binding in the
Okay. But before we can do that, we have to have. There's so many questions to be answered, and there are so many pieces of it that need to be absolutely perfect and need to be really secure on all different aspects. Yeah. And so I think it's healthy to frame that as an eventual destination with the understanding that we're a long ways away, and we'll get closer and closer to that over time.
Awesome. I just have 2 more things which are missing in the picture right now. One, a bit more about the tech, and the second thing being, I blanked out now. So let's go to the first one.
Let's start with tech.
So let's start with tech, and hopefully the second thing comes back to me. Sorry for that, but yeah. So
how would you like me to answer this about the tech?
I mean, what are you using? Is this just a web browser? Is this an application? Are you using any of these emerging technologies like AI, blockchain, whatever? Because I think I saw something about blockchain in your website. But something I really appreciate about you guys is the fact that you don't scream it, right? It's just more underlying tech, which I really, really appreciate. And the fact that we could have had, I don't know, I think it's over an hour now, a conversation without having to talk about blockchain, right? And it's more about the problem. And now we're going into the tech, how to actually facilitate this, and why is it happening now and not 100 years ago. That's just, I think more initiatives need to go around in that way, instead of saying, hey, look at us, we are Airbnb for blockchain or Uber for blockchain.
Yeah, that's right.
Because that's what I'm hearing left, right, and center everywhere.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's huge.
It's a freaking mania.
Yeah, I know. I mean, I think it's almost smart what you guys are doing, because you don't get the negative press from it. That you guys are just another scam or another ICO or whatever it is.
Yeah.
But
we're not doing an ICO at all.
Well, I think that's a really, really wise decision, in my humble opinion. But so the tech, what are you guys doing?
Good thing. Yeah. So blockchains are super cool from a theoretical point of view, from an engineering point of view. They have a large number of shortcomings from a real world product use case point of view. And they're still pretty early technology. And so in general, I always like to say the technology is the democracy. The democracy is the technology in order to address problems collectively.
Okay.
What we use in terms of, some code or computer bits and bytes, it's just a means to an end to fulfill the democratic vision. Mm-hmm. And so there are some really great ideas behind the blockchain stuff, but we take a really pragmatic view about what allows us to get this into as many people's hands as possible, as soon as possible, in a trustworthy way.
Mm-hmm. So solving the problem comes first. Like that's the...
Exactly. Yeah. Well, and also, we frame this in terms of phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, and it's when we get to phase 3 that everything needs to be perfect. And that's when it would make a lot more sense for this to be run on an entirely pure decentralized ledger.
Yeah, especially when you talk about bringing the legal side into it and those conditionalities, etc.
Exactly.
Yeah, because till then it's all about social pressure, right? So that's just human behavior. And I think then it's about making it transparent and connecting the dots. But yeah.
Exactly.
Okay.
But in the meantime, it is incredibly important that people can trust that their votes aren't being tampered with.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so we developed our own unique crypto system. It's called Proof of Vote.
Okay.
And the idea, it's pretty cool. I'm pretty proud of it. It's quite simple. Basically, when you cast a vote, that vote has a few unique elements. Your user ID, which is like your email address, the thing that you were voting on, like HR 652, and then the way that you voted, yay or nay. And then we also add a fourth element, which is a passphrase that you can change at any time. And we give you really strong, sensible defaults. And so we take these 4 elements and we make a cryptographic hash of these 4 elements. A one-way cryptographic hashing function, which has the special properties, like all hashes, that it's almost always unique. The chances of there being a collision is less than 1 over all the atoms in the universe. And it's really, really, really difficult to reverse the hash. If you know the input, you can always deterministically calculate the output, but you can't go from the output back to the input. Okay. And so that hash we call your vote ID. It's unique to every vote that you cast. And so then we show a public ledger of vote ID position, vote ID position, vote ID position. So 64821 nay, okay. 873912 yay, and so on and so on. And what that means is that you as an individual voter, we tell you what your hash is, but because you know the inputs that go into it, and these are all open source mathematical cryptographic functions, you could recalculate it your own as well if you don't trust us. You can see this public ledger and just Control F, find your unique vote ID and say, look, there's my vote. My vote got entered correctly. It didn't get tampered with. And that's the official record of votes.
Okay. Okay, and this is already happening in your beta version that's live, or is that happening?
Not exactly.
Okay.
I wish I could tell you that it was. It's happening in our prototype on this native app. It's not very difficult to use. Here's an example of it. This was for a single item. So this is the audit vote screen. This was my hash on this item, and here's a record of all the hashes and then a vote, and all the hashes and a vote. Let me tell you the formula to calculate it.
Okay.
We haven't added it into the current public web app yet, but we have a technical write-up that explains how it all works, and we're planning to add it soon. And then we, of course, we'd cryptographically sign that document so you know it's coming from us, and you could redistribute it offline and know it's secure. And we do also want to take a signature of that document, a hash of that document, and stick that into a proof of work blockchain, which gives us immutability.
Okay.
The point of all this is that you get cryptographic verifiability. You know that your vote got entered correctly, and anyone can can tabulate all the votes immediately rather than depending on some external service to tabulate them. But we don't get the downsides of the blockchain. And there's a few different big downsides. But the main two from an architecture perspective are the performance. They have really bad problems with allowing millions of people to use these things at scale right now. And there's some really interesting work on improving that, but still too early. And, the CryptoKitties took down the entire Ethereum network. There weren't really that many people actively using it. And it costs a lot of money, on the performance side as well. If you want to send Bitcoins, you could be spending $30 just a single transaction. And so the first part is performance, and the second part is privacy. There's still some really hard questions to be answered about privacy. And there are some really, really cool cryptography with things like zero knowledge proofs, like Zcash is doing, or ring signatures, like Monero is doing, and homomorphic encryption, which is what we were doing at my previous startup. And these ideas are fascinating, but they're really difficult to implement, and they introduce a lot of performance penalties, and they're very expensive to implement, and they make the entire system much, much harder for people to understand and interact with. And so this initial model gives everyone verifiability. It's built on top of, we have a traditional SQL database on the back that can reach, the same thing. It powers Facebook, 1 billion active people a day, and still protects individual voter privacy. So other people aren't finding out what your vote is by default, and is easy. You don't have to manage your own cryptographic keys at all. You don't have to, keep track of this stuff and lose it, which is, terrible, terrible UX that a lot of blockchains are plagued with right now. And so it's people are already using it, and it's great.
Yeah. So what you're telling me is that it's what you have right now, the beta version, it's secure enough that people are willing to use it, right? Like that's I think that's the key takeaway from it. And you realize it's not the ideal solution yet, and you're working towards that. But
exactly,
there's no point in just trying to crack the ideal solution. It's more about the people. So in the beginning, it's just if the people are willing to do it, given as long as you're completely upfront to them, then that's good enough, right?
Yeah. Yeah, the security model is that you don't need to necessarily trust us to maintain the integrity of your vote.
Okay.
You can make sure that your integrity is still strong. And there are more improvements that can come over time in terms of even stronger privacy and a number of other things. And so we're beginning to sketch out the roadmaps of what that looks like. And as we reach more and more people, and as our scorecards are more widely used, and we get more candidates on the ballot and make a bigger splash and get some people elected, that will bring in a lot more intellectual horsepower to get us to where we eventually want to be with even stronger decentralized technologies.
Okay.
And so it's a process. We're doing what is appropriate for this stage that allows to get out the door.
I mean, that always, because these are the kind of conversations that gets me a bit, because it's a bit more detailed, right? So I can learn more from it, right? And that's actually reminds me of the second thing I want to fill in before. It's kind of, what were your biggest challenges so far, right? Like, what were the roadblocks that you hit? Because I imagine you've had at least a couple that you had to overcome. And what do you foresee? Like, what do you think are the biggest hurdles that are coming up in the future?
Yeah, so I'll start with the political side, the actually reaching people side. By far, the biggest hurdle is that people aren't really all that familiar. 99.99% of people have never heard the phrase liquid democracy.
Yeah.
Some people are starting to learn about it, which is cool. And people that do know about it are generally pretty excited about it, but that's a small number right now.
Yeah, it's surprising because I typed it into YouTube, and the topmost one, I think it had less than 100K views. It was quite still in the trench. And from what you've told me earlier, it's been in the workings since 2002, and even earlier people have referred to it, right?
Yeah, I think the phrase was probably around 2006. Okay. I have a timeline written somewhere that is going to publish the first time someone used the phrase liquid democracy. It was also a delegative democracy before that.
Okay.
But that's growing and that's changing, and we've developed a lot of educational material. Once people get in the door, we follow up with what's called drip emails to help people understand just exactly what it is that we're doing here. And so that's a big issue. And it's not just that people aren't familiar with it, but also that the idea is a bit of a departure from the way we do things right now. And it takes some time for people to really wrap their head around. Anywhere from a 30-minute conversation to a 10-minute conversation to a 5-minute. So trying to get that down is a big
because I think one of the key things, and you see this in a lot of different solutions, right? Because I think one of the key things and this is something that one of the other people we are working with told me about, and I think it's a really nice way of looking at it, is that people need to come to terms or be okay with the fact that they should let as many people as possible in on deciding what the future looks like, right? Like they should kind of give the power to the people. They should have trust in their fellow men and women, right? Because I think that's the biggest thing, where you have to take the power away from a selected few, and you have to be like, you know what? Because most likely it might have been going according to your favor for a while now, but you're like, you know what? It's okay. It's better to, on a principle level, just have it, just have it for everyone. And then I think, at least in my head, education or conversation or dialogue will be the way that you kind of try to pull people onto your side, right? Like, or what you think is ideal, or what people should be choosing for.
Yeah, I can agree with a lot of that, with some caveats that it puts a really high expectation upon people that I don't necessarily think everyone's ready to make. The way I think about it, there's really three groups of people. Yeah. The first group is the liquid democracy nerds, let's call them. And you and I are these people right now. Anyone that's watching this and has watched for an hour is officially a liquid democracy nerd at this point. Yeah. And this is one of my favorite groups of people in the world. You can have so many fascinating conversations, but it takes a lot of time and investment to reach that stage. And it's a very, very, very narrow segment of the population. They're usually incredibly strong advocates for these ideas and willing to put a lot of time and energy into making them a reality. But it's not necessarily, it's not going to be a critical mass anytime soon. The second group, a larger group, but still somewhat small, let's say 1 in 10 people, is people who are really politically engaged. People who watch the news every day, who do call their Congress people or participate in politics professionally in one way or another. And this is the people that we're in many ways trying to design something really great for. And it's still, it's still only 1 in 10 people, let's say, or some small percentage of the population. But liquid democracy in the long run will be fantastic for these people because it gives them much more of ability to have a meaningful impact. Okay. And so clarifying, most of them are going to come in on individual issues. So they're going to feel really strongly about, this issue of the day or that issue of the day. And our job is to say, you have a really strong opinion on this. Here's a way that you can transform your political opinions into meaningful action. Reach your representative, hold your representative accountable for the action you want to see. Write this really compelling argument about why this is the right way to do it. And then the main group of people, the real critical mass, and how this is going to take off overnight after 10 years of hard work, is the 9 out of 10 people who aren't really necessarily politically engaged. For the vast majority of us, what we think of politics is, I like Representative so-and-so. I'm on this person's team, or I like the red team, or I like the blue team. And for the vast majority of people, politics is just, I trust candidate A more than I trust candidate B. I want to make sure that person has more of a voice. I want to empower them. And so for a lot of people, this will just be about, saying, I really think Barack Obama is the most trustworthy person to decide America's future, let's say hypothetically. And so I'm going to delegate my vote to them. Or vice versa, the people from the previous group, those 1 out of 10 people, now that they've gotten into the system, when you verify your identity on the platform, you create your own profile page. Your United.vote / your username that you can pick. And right on that page, we have a big delegate button, just like on your Instagram, you'd have a big follow button, or on YouTube, you have a big subscribe button. And so you're already casting these votes. Now you can reach out to your networks and say, look, I'm already taking the time to do this. I invite you to allow me to represent you. You're not casting a vote right now. At least you'll get something a little bit better, and you'll help make me have a louder voice. And you can override me at any time, and you can take it back at any time. It's still your voice. You're still in control. But this sort of, there's this built-in virality to all this.
Yeah, because I think that's where, I think, sorry for cutting you off, but I think that's where I see a lot of potential, because you say 1 in 10, and I'm like, everyone has at least one friend who is super politically active. Right, and you go on the weekend for beer with him, or you have dinner on Tuesdays with him. So there's also constant feedback and conversations, right? And I think that's where this becomes really valuable, because then it's kind of, I give it to that guy, right? And then I just check up on here down now and then. Exactly. And I think that's where the potential is, right? So even if the other 9 people don't care, they know that their 10th friend really cares, and he puts in the effort, because I can see it. And the fact that every time we're having dinner, this is all he can talk about. So I'm kind of like, okay, you know what? Here's my bit. I trust you. And because of the fact that I'm having drinks with you every other week, there's this constant feedback loop, which I think is really important, because then you get to truly know the other person, right? It's not just something that's like public perception, right? It's just like you actually get to interact with the other person. And I think that really excites me, because I think that's where, like you said, that's where I think it can really blow up, because there's a lot of potential there.
That's the vision. Yeah. That's what it's all about. Personalized representation, peer-to-peer representation.
Yeah. Awesome. We're kind of, we've been going for quite a while now. I just want to wrap it up with one last question. It's basically, what are the hurdles now? Right, like what's the big? I know there are many, but what do you think right now, when in this conversation, and when you had your strategy call early this day, what's that thing that you're kind of preparing for mentally? That the biggest challenge that you're like, I need to move these chess pieces accordingly, or whatever it is, to make this happen.
Yeah, I mean, I could tell you to give insight. Is it all right to give you something that's very personal to me, or would you prefer something that other people could help out with more?
Personal is fine too. Like,
okay. Yeah. So the personal one for me, I've been working on this for about 2 years now, 18 months full time. I have a full-time partner, CTO here, who's amazing, and a lot of that time has been, tinkering in our garage, so to say. The early phase of building this stuff out, and it's been really fun, but now we're entering a new phase of this project. Now that I've announced my candidacy, and we have another candidate in Oakland, and we have many more tentative candidates all over the country, we're starting to get a lot more attention, and a lot of people are reaching out and wanting to get involved. And it's fantastic, and it's so wonderful, and I couldn't be more grateful. And it's a challenge to make that transition from garage organization to a real organized movement of an organization.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of questions to be figured out around, time management, and whose, roles and responsibilities, and legal structures that we're setting up these new organizations. And there's a lot of funding questions that are, there's also different possibilities and ways to approach it. And so that's one of the big things on my mind. On top of that, also trying to continue developing the product, because we have, we're 3% of where we want to be in terms of technology right now. We have a long, long way to go. And at the same time, I'm also running for office and have to run my own campaign, do my own candidacy, and collect signatures and respond to endorsement questionnaire forms, and set up fundraisers, and do a lot of things.
Are you guys looking for more volunteers and these kind of things, or is it something that you're like, okay, hold up, like I need to think about this properly before I get more people on board, even on a volunteer basis?
No, the more the merrier. I mean, the way, we have really ambitious goals. We're trying to transform a 200 plus year institution that manages $4 trillion a year in annual budget. and we're obviously not going to be able to do that alone. And the more hardworking, believers we have involved, the better, by all means. And so I invite people to reach out. You can reach me personally. We have a lot of contact things all over the website. I'm pretty public with my email address. It's David@United.vote. And we have like a Slack group for insiders that are involved. There's 50 people or something like that are chatting, and we have regular calls and things like that. And so we're still trying to improve our processes around making sure that people have clear opportunities to contribute in meaningful ways. But yeah, reaching out is hugely valuable, and it'd be great to hear from more people and get these ideas spreading more and more.
Awesome. And then I said last question before, but this is a quick one. Is so if the viewers want to learn more about Liquid Democracy, apart from your website, is there any other place that's kind of like go there, and if you spend some time there, you're good? Like you get the basic understanding of maybe even a book or a podcast or anything.
So Camilo, the candidate who ran in Boulder last year, and I have been developing this Liquid Citizen podcast, which will be fantastic, but we haven't published our first episode yet. Okay. To answer your question, if they like reading and they want more material, one of the best places is actually our blog, which isn't super obvious from our website. So that's blog.united.vote. Okay. And there are about a dozen different articles in there that all examine a different aspect. So one is an introductory post to Liquid Democracy, and one is just focusing on this idea of liquid candidates, and one is just about our scorecards and how we develop the scorecard methodology. And one is, what does liquid democracy mean for a two-party system? And what does liquid democracy mean for money in politics? And what's liquid democracy compared to the historical original vision of America back in 1776? Mm-hmm. We get into that amendment that I was talking about with the 30,000 people, and a bunch of other really cool articles. Okay. That's a great place. There's some cool videos. There's this great video I just came across recently by this guy named Jeremy in New York, but unfortunately I don't have an easy link to it. But there's a video. If you go to our website and you scroll to the bottom on the homepage, there's like Learn More section that has a lot more reading links to some of the key blog posts. And there's a video of a speech that I gave all about these ideas at this international cyber governance forum in India. That was really cool. Okay. A bunch of prime ministers and things like that. It was pretty sweet.
All right. Okay. I think that's a wrap. Like I have a clear picture of what you're doing, and I think you've got one more convert. I think two more converts by the look of Matt's face here, and we will stay tuned and see how you guys are progressing with this. And thank you for taking the time and doing this.
It's been really fun. I'm glad you're here.
Yeah,